Hi all, and welcome to my second video here on YouTube. Today we are going to be making these teeny tiny little flowers. Here's one for an example. They're roses. This one is purple, just simply because it's probably easier for you guys to see. So, things that we're going to need. Tacky glue. Now, I managed to get my hands on some Aleene's tacky glue here in Australia, which is actually quite hard to find, but I actually found mine at a store called Riot, which honestly, they have amazing stuff at really, really good prices. So I'd definitely check that out if you had a chance. Secondly, we have obviously pliers, purple watercolor just to go with the purple theme of the flower. So we also have some purple scrap paper, a little piece of off-cut foam board, which honestly you can use anything that's sort of squishy just so that you can sort of put a pin through it. This is a pickup pencil. Now if you don't have one of these, I highly recommend it. I think this is sort of like a crayon eraser-y sort of core that it just helps you pick up paper just so much easier, especially tiny little bits. So tiny little paintbrush, X-Acto knife, always need the X-Acto knife, needle nose pliers, just in case. These ones are not necessary, but just in case. Now this is a definite must for this project. This is a large dotting tool, which they use in nail art. I got these from eBay. So they're actually, the brand is TNS Australia. These are brilliant for using just for simply dotting or for curving things, which is how we're going to use them today. So we have here some dressmaker's pins. So hopefully you can see that tiny little head on it. That's all you want. You don't want any of those big pins with the big sort of knobby bit on the top. Otherwise it just sort of gives too much thickness. Now we have two little hole punches. One is a tiny little star and one is a flower, obviously. They're both about 1 centimeter across. Now I use these punches. You can use whatever punch you want as far as size goes. I generally make these roses for half scale or 1/24 scale. I think you can probably use them in 1/12 scale if you wanted some sort of like tiny little roses or something, but yeah, that's just what I'm using it for. So last but not least, we have this paper, which I actually made myself. It is literally just a piece of same as this paper, but it's green. It's literally printer paper, I think, and I just lightly brushed over a darker green acrylic over the top, let that dry, and then went over the whole surface of it with some wood glue. And I use this one, which is Gorilla Wood Glue. It ends up leaving on paper, it ends up leaving this sort of leathery, really shiny, beautiful sort of material, which you can use in so many different things. I mean, you can use it in leather if you wanted like a pleather sort of thing, and it's thin. Whereas I use it for leaves and, you know, the bases of roses, etc. And it's honestly, it's just a godsend. Yeah. Okay, let's get started on this little project. So I have here, see, pick up 4 to 5. It all depends on your thickness, because as you would know, if you're building anything in half scale, thickness is basically what determines whether it looks realistic or not. So that all depends on your own perception of this as to how many layers you're going to put on, but I'm choosing to do 5, I think, with this one. My previous one was only 4, but we'll see how we go. So you grab one of your little flowers, and with your dotting tool, just start lightly pressing. I do this on the craft mat because it's just a smidge spongy, but it's not overly spongy where it's going to crease the paper. You want to make sure that you're curving all of these little petals so that they end up sort of like an inverted dome, if you know what I mean. So it's like that. Now, my first diagram is this one right here. these tiny little red areas here is where you want to cut. Very, very, very minute cuts. It's all just to sort of help it fold and become the center of the rose. So with this one, tiny little nicks. And make sure that you do not get into the center, or make sure that none of the cuts are touching each other, otherwise you're going to lose the entire shape of the flower. So, alrighty. Yeah, honestly, this thing is amazing. You can get one if you don't have one. Pop him on there, curving upwards. Grab your pin. Pop him in your pliers. Now dip it in the glue, and you honestly don't need too much at all. I literally just put a little dot, sort of like that. Now using your pliers again, just for accuracy's sake, pierce it straight through the middle. You may have to sort of go up and down a few times for it to grip to the pin. Now this is why I leave my nails longer, even though I'm a male. It makes my life so much easier when I'm trying to do things like this. So pushing him up just like that, and then we are going to gently, and I mean so gently, roll it between our fingers so that it all sort of starts to join up. Keep rolling. And you can get harder as you go, but just keep in mind, as soon as you moisten any sort of printer paper, it just turns into mush pretty much. So this is what you're left with, this tiny little bud. Now you can just have this with the last step, which I'll get to afterwards using the star, just as like almost a rose bud instead of a full-blown rose, which is what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to do a full-bloomed one. So now, the second layer, we're going to curve it once again. No cutting this time, so it gets a little bit easier. And once again, you want it as an inverted dome, and you want them all curving upwards. So pop it onto your foam board, and honestly, the foam board just makes it easier for the pin to be able to go through, instead of struggling trying to put it through, and then, you know, it honestly just makes it so much easier. So using a toothpick, pick up a tiny little bit of glue and just pop it around the pin, sort of at the base of your bud. Grabbing with the pliers again and piercing straight through the middle. It's a repetitive process from here, but honestly the results are amazing. I have glue on this pin, so it's making it harder. Okay, so into the middle. Now we're just sort of pressing it upwards, and as you do so, roll it just a bit between your fingers so that we're forming more petals around the middle. So there's like a half open rose, if you wanted something like that. It's all so free when you do miniatures, honestly. All right, so now we're just going to repeat that step a third time. Once again with the curve going upwards, just like the previous two. Oops. Tiny bit of glue around the base once again. And you really don't need to overdo it with the glue, because these will stick like crazy once the paper comes into contact. So there again. Now this time, I'll show you another diagram in a second of what I mean, but you sort of want to make sure that your petals and the gaps between the petals are alternating. So you don't want it, you want it more, see there is a gap right there and there's a petal here. So you want them to sort of, you want the petals to overlap the gaps basically. And I'll show you what I mean. Just pop this one on. So here's a diagram. So basically there's your first layer, and you want your second layer so that the petals are alternating between the gaps. It just makes it more realistic and gives it more depth, honestly. So once again, you can give it a gentle roll just to make sure that it's all in formation. And as you can see, once you're building up the layers, it actually gives it this sort of cool 3D effect. So I'll pop him back down here. So that was the third one. Now we're up to the fourth one. Now we're going to curve this one just like the others. Rolling that ball point all over it. Now this one, instead of having it curving that way like we did before, we want to flip this one upside down, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So we want the curve going downwards instead. Yeah, we're grabbing a tiny bit of glue. Oop, that's a bit too much. Tiny bit of glue around the base, once again, just like the last time. Pliers, and once again we're going to try and alternate the petals, just so they're not so uniform. So just spin him just a smidge, and now this one we're not rolling whatsoever. We're just gently, oh so gently, pushing it upwards. I'm so sorry that I was out of focus, out of frame for a second there. Still getting used to everything. Alright, so now we're starting to build up these outer petals. Now I am going to go for 5 with this one, simply because honestly it gives it so much more dimension when you do it. So one more, curving. Curve it as much as you like. I tend to sort of do the outer layers a lot more curvy than the inner layers. It's all about dimension. Now, again, just like the last one, flipping this one upside down. Grab your rose. And tiny bit of glue just around the pin, piercing straight through the center. And this is where it becomes almost crucial that you alternate the gaps and the petals, because otherwise it starts to look very uniform, which roses are not. So pushing him up, make sure that the petals are in the gaps. And just putting pressure on the bottom here. And there you have it. You have a full in bloom rose. As you can see, these just turn out beautifully every time I do them. I'm in love with this process. So we'll just pop that one aside to dry for a second. Now, we're grabbing glossy paper, star punch, one punch. Now, once again, I'm going to show you a diagram because it gets tedious. So excuse the pencil lines on here, but here's your star cutout, and these little red areas, you're going to cut them out with your X-Acto knife. And as I said, it's tedious, but it's so worth it in the end for the effect. So I will show you afterwards what this looks like, but honestly, there's probably no point in trying to get you to see what it looks like on camera because it's not easy to focus. Tried it once before. So basically what this is the bottom of the rose where the rose hip sits, and the sort of outer coating of the rose before it blooms, and it's all sort of curled up at the bottom. And make sure you do not cut into the center of your little star piece, because that will just screw everything up and you'll have to start from scratch. So, rose. Tiny bit of glue once again. And we will pick him up. So make sure that the shiny side, if you can see, is facing downwards. Pierce it through the middle. You can actually use these for tops of tomatoes too. And push it up. Once again, attempting to alternate it. So, well, maybe not so much this one actually, but you can see the tiny little green tips in between and from underneath. That's what it looks like. So that's the full built rose. Now, just to give it that smidgen more depth, I'm going to grab a darker shade of watercolor. Make sure that there's quite a lot of water onto it. And just dab your paintbrush in just a smidge. Now we're just going to dab just tiny little bits onto the outside of the petals. Once again, this is just giving it a little bit more dimension, a little bit more realistic, you know, color shifting. Now the center, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the center of a rose is generally darker than the outside. So just pop some in there. You know, honestly, it's all up to your own judgment, but it's not hard. So there we have it. There's the little rose. Now I'll show you one other little bonus thing. Now, oh, sorry, before I do, these generally I will cut off probably 2 mil below the little green bit that we've just popped on, and then I will glue them straight to a vine. So this is a miniature that I've made recently, a little gazebo. And as you can see here, I've made pink roses with white paper, and I just glue them using that tiny little bit of metal, just sort of holds it in between the string, and it glues it in. And honestly, they're solid as houses once you've got them on there. They're brilliant. And these are the 1 layer little buds. And now I'm going to show you how to do these tiny little leaves. And as you can see, in comparison to my finger, they are tiny. So I have a bunch of these prepared actually already because I'm working on a project. So these ones, this is very simple. It's just very tedious. Grabbing this paper once again, which is a godsend. We'll cut out a flower. Now I'll show you another last diagram. This here, your flower, and these red lines here is where you're going to be cutting so that you make leaf shapes. So each little flower makes 5 leaves, which is just brilliant because you can mass produce them pretty much. So we're cutting them out. Honestly, it's so satisfying once you end up with the full product. So I'll just do one. I'm not going to sit there and cut them all out and waste your time. But as you can see, these leaves are tiny. So this X-Acto blade is not exactly sharp. And I don't recommend doing this. Actually, no, I'm not going to do it because I don't want anyone hurting themselves. Pop it back onto your foam board. Using your blunt sort of X-Acto blade. Line it up. Give it a press. Not too hard that you cut through it. But just enough to give it that little bit of a crease. And I've lost it. That little bit of a crease to make it more lifelike into a leaf. And make sure that you glue it from the curved side down onto whatever you're doing. So there you go. Leave that in frame. I really hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. give me a like and a subscribe if that's what you feel like doing. I will continue to upload videos. I'm hoping that I'll end up doing a weekly schedule of tutorials. And if you don't follow my Instagram already, it is aaron.and.his.miniatures on Instagram, but I'll leave a link in the description box below if you want to check that out. And I've got heaps of projects on there. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm so glad that you've made it through to the end. And if anyone hasn't, I'm sorry that I've babbled on for too long, but I'm still getting used to this whole YouTube thing. So thank you for bearing with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.